What if your silence said more about you than you could imagine? What is a bystander and why does it matter? A bystander is someone who witnesses an injustice and does nothing about it. They turn a blind eye and stay silent. But bystanding affects everyone involved, even the bystander themselves. When I was 18, I went to university. And it's fun, isn't it? So it's the first time you're away from home, there's a whole load of new friends, and there's a lot of drinking and partying, probably a lot more drinking than studying as well, and awkward. And I remember anyway, I don't know about you guys, but I turned practically nocturnal. We were going to bed at like 4 in the morning, then getting up at like 12 the next day after completely missing our first lecture. Wait, I'm just making my parents really proud right now, if you haven't realized. Yeah, one for them. But it's fun. But for me, it was a little bit different. For the first few months of university, I was being sexually abused and finally raped by someone who was supposed to be a friend. Now, as awful as that sounds, here's what's interesting. The abuse itself didn't really stick with me that long, but other people's reactions to it did. Just like Martin Luther King here indicates, I had many silent friends. I remember arguing with him in his doorway one afternoon about what he'd been doing to me, and I was incredibly distressed. And his neighbor across the corridor had her door wide open, and she sat at her desk and did nothing. I remember a girl went into his room one day to find that he was on his computer, but he was logged in to my Facebook and my Hotmail accounts because he had stolen my password and he was stalking me. And she didn't even question it. And then finally, when I managed to muster the courage to tell everyone what had been going on, because I didn't want to let him get away with it, there were those that tried to ignore it and sweep it under the carpet. And I felt as if I was some form of embarrassment, as if I had done something wrong. And then there were those that said, I don't want to get involved. And hearing those words, they felt like daggers, a betrayal. It hurt. And this isn't rare, as I later discovered in another career as a domestic abuse specialist. And I supported many men and women over my career who suffered various forms of abuse. And again, what we saw were how these people were being re-victimized by people other than the original perpetrator, by bystanders. My friend Rachel a few years ago was on the way to work, and she saw a woman get on the bus with her baby, and a man closely followed. This man was threatening and harassing her. And this woman was also on the phone to what seemed like the police, explaining how she had an injunction against her ex-partner and he was following her. And she was scared. Rachel was struck at how nobody did anything. Even the bus driver just continued driving as if nothing was going on. Rachel approached this woman and offered her some supportive words and begged her to stay on the bus because she figured she would be safer in public. And then eventually this woman did get off with her baby, with the man following and the threats continuing. As Einstein said, the world is a dangerous place, not because of those who do evil, but because of those who look on and do nothing. So why? Why are people choosing silence again and again? Well, there seems to be two main myths that a bystander is believing when they choose silence. The first myth is that they think that by being silent, they're actually keeping out of it. But that's not strictly true. The moment that you witness an injustice, you're already involved. And the second myth is that they believe that silence is neutral. But just as this quote here indicates, silence is not neutral. In these situations, silence is biased. Silence actually picks a side. Think about everyone on the bus. Although no one implicitly was agreeing with what was going on, by staying silent, they allowed it to continue. There are three main areas that are impacted by this silence. And the first area is the victim and perpetrator. So on this particular example, the perpetrator is the man on the bus. The silence is serving him. It's powerful to him. It means he can continue doing whatever he wants to do without any consequences for his behavior. But the victim, she wants help. And just like so many people I supported over the years, she feels alone and like no one really cares about the injustice that she's experiencing. So in that moment, both victim and perpetrator hear the same message. It's okay to continue. And then what about everyone else? What about other observers? So my friend Maddie was on the way home from work, and she came across two people who were arguing in the street, and one person was being incredibly racist to this other person. And Maddie, just like everybody else, she put her head down and continued on walking. But everyone is also witnessing Maddie's response, or lack of. So they too are hearing the same message in her silence. It's okay to continue. And then lastly, what about Maddie? Your subconscious is listening to everything that you do and do not do. So your subconscious is thinking, Maddie's subconscious is thinking, oh, okay, I get it. So we say we care about equality and respect, but actually it's not that important because we're not going to do anything about it. And that's just not true. Maddie does care, and she knows it's wrong. But now it's impacting her, because it's impacting her integrity. Integrity is about being true to yourself, to knowing what's important to you, what you care about, what you stand for, and then living congruently with that through your behavior and then your life. So your life becomes a true representation of who you are. And people who have more levels of integrity and live with more integrity are happier because they can be proud of who they are. Fortunately, Maddie's integrity spoke up that day, and she turned around and walked back and offered that person help. One of the biggest misconceptions when it comes to handling an injustice is that people again and again seem to think that the only option is to dive head first in, like get right into the thick of it and handle it head on. And actually that's not true. There are going to be many cases, because the different forms of injustices will vary in levels of severity. There'll be plenty of occasions where it's not safe, and it would be safer to call for help. But that is still taking an action. That still sends out a different message. So I want to cover just a few little options today of different ways that we can send out a different message about ourselves and break our silence. So the first one is education. So a father and 8-year-old boy are out and about, and they witness some homophobic behavior. Now in that moment, they could ignore it. But that child has just learned something. Because children are like sponges, right? They soak up all this information about the world. So in that moment, that child has just learned, this is normal. This is what we do. This is how we treat someone who is gay. Or the father could take that boy aside and point out to him and say, that's wrong. That is not how we treat people. And in that moment, that boy has learned something very different. And that can then ripple out into his life. And then what about questioning? So in our culture, street harassment seems to happen day by day. And many of us tend to see it as normal, and we just sort of get on with it. But I remember hearing about this guy. There was a man who was hollering and catcalling at this woman on the street, and this guy went up to this man and just said, I just want to know, why are you doing that? By questioning his behavior, it gives him a chance to think about his behavior. I mean, how often are we really thinking about how we behave? We just do things all the time without really thinking. But by thinking about your behavior, it has the power to change it. And this is one of the main concepts that underpins some of the domestic violence perpetrator work, questioning their behavior about their abuse, and so that they can think for themselves about healthier behavior and choosing that of their own volition. And lastly, what about support? So even when the injustice is all said and done, as far as you can tell, you can offer that person support. I will never forget the handful of people who offered me support at university and broke their silence. And if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have made it through that year. Never underestimate the power of support. Now, I just want to mention Benedict Cumberbatch. So, yeah, I know a few people are probably wondering, why is she talking about Sherlock, right? Well, bear with. Apart from the fact that I absolutely adore this guy, so I'll be honest, I would have found some way or another to get him onto my talk. Therefore, if anyone happens to know him, please pass over the details, yeah? Rosie Allen, perfect. But actually, he does deserve a space here today. Benedict Cumberbatch spoke on stage at the end of every performance in Hamlet, and he spoke out about the Syrian refugee crisis. This is a perfect example of somebody who's breaking the silence that so many of us seem to be living in. And I'm not saying we all have to be a Cumberbatch, but actually, it's our responsibility to break our own silence. And when I say responsibility, I mean it's our ability to respond. In all of the examples I've used today, people have used their ability to respond. This has the power to change what is acceptable and what is not acceptable in society. They can show the victim and perpetrator, other observers, and ourselves that it is not okay to continue, and we do not choose silence. I always wondered why somebody didn't do anything about that. And then I realized I am somebody. Thank you.